Hey everyone, welcome back to the Trauma Doula. I'm so happy that you can be here, whether you are tuning in from the podcast or from YouTube. Is doing yoga the best way to release emotional trauma that's been trapped and stored in your body? Let's talk about it. This is something that comes up time and time again in people's healing journeys. They want to get that emotional trauma release and all of that energy that is stuck and circulated in your body that comes up again and again and again. Oftentimes people point to yoga as a way to support that healing and to get that release. Now, the reason I say it depends, because yes, yoga is beautiful and it is an amazing modality. But one thing that I find that a lot of people don't recognize about yoga as a practice is that yoga is a spiritual practice that has elements of somatics and energy healing. And all of these things are a part of the spiritual discipline. So when people think about yoga, they think that it's asana. And asana is the thing that most people think about when they think about yoga. You think about those classes where people are reaching up, doing down dog. All of those things are asana, which is the somatic physical part of the practice, and sometimes not connected to the deeper aspects of the practice. So from the jump, if you're talking about yoga to release and restore and heal your body, it is a beautiful modality, but in its very essence, in its very nature, it is a spiritual practice. And that's something I think is really important to recognize if this is something you want to be a part of, because the way I practice is always yoga as a spiritual practice first, and everything else is secondary. Another reason why there is a little bit of an issue with people who don't know a lot and you're just looking for ways to heal, and you hear that yoga could be a great thing for you to get into and to start, is that there are so many different kinds of yoga. There are so many different kinds of yoga. So you go into any class and it could be vinyasa, it could be hatha, it could be restorative, it could be yin, it could be power. All of those are simply different kinds of asana. We're not even talking about bhakti or jhana, jnana yoga. And those are completely different paths of yoga. So when we're looking for classes specifically to heal the trauma in our bodies, there comes this question of like, well, which class do I go to? A lot of times, the teachers who teach these different types of classes may or may not be trauma informed. So there's a difference between trauma informed and trauma trained. So there's another step to take to understand if the teacher that you're taking the class with is even supporting trauma survivors in their classes. And while the yoga industry and the mental health industry as a whole has taken great strides to bring everyone up to par on being trauma informed, trauma informed does not mean trauma trained. It doesn't mean trauma safe, right? Just because someone's trauma informed doesn't mean they can make the space in which they occupy a safe place for survivors to come and heal and slip into that essence of safety and comfort with time, right? And that's why most yoga studios and places where yoga is practiced, that's why most of them fail at supporting trauma survivors specifically, because a lot of these practitioners are not trained in trauma. Now, when it comes to understanding PTSD, CPTSD, there is specific training that people can take and do that helps them understand how to apply what they do. I don't care if it's art therapy. I don't care if it's regular therapy, mental health therapy, if it's yoga therapy. I don't care if it's personal fitness. There are trainings that people can take so that they are trauma trained and understand how to work within their modality, people who have experienced trauma. And that's something the world desperately needs right now. Being trauma trained doesn't mean that you're a therapist. It just means that you're trained in trauma and you can apply your modality to work with people with trauma. And so that's the difference in recognizing yoga teachers in the profession who are trauma trained and trauma informed. Trauma informed just means I know what trauma is. I know some things about it. Trauma trained is I've trained to not just understand what trauma is, but to recognize signs, symptoms, patterns, and how to hold the presence of self and sense of self to be a presence of safety, how to create that sense of safety, how to change the way I work and application processes, all these things to support survivors. So when you go into these spaces and yoga studios that don't necessarily have trauma trained professionals, they can do more harm than good. And it's not the yoga teachers' fault that they're doing more harm than good. It's just simply the fact that many doctors and therapists and other professionals are understanding and seeing the benefits that yoga has to offer for trauma, for PTSD, CPTSD, anxiety, depression, and they're referring people to yoga spaces, and these spaces don't always have professionals who are trained to support them. So that gets me to my next point of stepping back from the reasons why sometimes you might go into a space and experience something very negative as a survivor. Yoga, especially yoga specifically tailored to trauma survivors, tailored to and for survivors of childhood trauma, etc. There have been many scientific studies at this point that show the reduction of PTSD symptoms, the reduction of anxiety symptoms, even some have shown the reduction of depressive symptoms. And even people who continue to practice yoga and yoga asana in these ways, it's been shown that they don't even meet the criteria for PTSD anymore. And there's many studies, and there needs to be many more rigorous studies. I'm excited for the field of yoga scholars to be coming forward and to be stepping up and doing these studies and partnering with these medical schools and doing this work, because yoga as a intervention, I've seen the benefits. I've seen what it can do for people. I've seen what it can do for myself, what it did for me when I was working in crisis intervention and dealing with my own childhood trauma. Yoga was my lifeline. Along with journaling. But yoga and journaling and that deep dive into that somatic practice for me was the thing that shifted the entire way I thought about myself. And the funny thing about this practice is you will find yourself coming into the stuff in your body, the stuff in your mind. And you can either pick it up and look at it and go through it, or you can bypass it. And I find that's the two experiences that it doesn't matter what practice you get into, you can bypass the stuff. So is yoga a good way to release emotional trauma from your body? I think so. I know it worked for me. Can you bypass your shit and decide you don't want to deal with it even if you're doing yoga or therapy or any other modality that is supposed to support you in healing trauma in your body? Absolutely. The difference is how you do it and who you do it with, of course, because if they're not a trauma trained professional, it is going to be very difficult or even harmful for you to continue those practices with someone who's not trauma trained and centered in their own practice. So what are some things you can look out for in any professional if you want to go and support your own trauma healing journey? One is some kind of trauma training. Something. Is their yoga training therapeutic or trauma informed and trauma conscious? Shout out to the trauma conscious yoga method. Have they had additional training aside from their yoga teacher training that maybe has nothing to do with yoga, but other training about trauma? Do they think they're the answer? Because sometimes, and this is just from personal experience, teachers think they're the answer when they're just the support. They're there to guide, but they're not the guru. Anybody that tells you that they know and they're the only way, probably not a good place to be no matter what you're trying to accomplish. Another way that I'm just throwing in some bonuses for y'all, because when you are in a place of healing and healing from trauma, you are in this vulnerable place where it's very easy to get taken advantage of. And especially when you're starting out or you're just starting to try different things, it's so easy to get manipulated, and that's how people join cults. So I was telling you things to look out for. But my number one thing for any professional that I work with is, do they expect me to work with them indefinitely, or do they believe that they can give me tools, not just tools, but something to follow, and a framework so that I can be the lead of my own healing? So when someone comes to you and they're supporting you, are they teaching you to do something that you can learn, and over time you grow in this independence and you can become your own guide, and they continue to point you back to yourself and not towards them, right? That's vitally important. Anyhow, if you got anything out of this, if you are deciding to take your step on your yoga journey, leave a comment below, and in the description box below, I'm going to be doing some trauma yoga pop-ups, y'all. So these are going to be monthly pop-ups so that you can get a taste of what it feels like and what's different with the yoga as a spiritual practice for healing in a somatically embodied way. Anyway, thanks for joining. See you next time.